Gabriel slammed his wine glass down so hard the stem snapped, red liquid spilling like blood across the white linen tablecloth. The conversation around us froze, heads turning from nearby tables, but he didn't notice. He was too busy glaring at me like I'd just insulted his very existence. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" he hissed, voice low but deadly sharp. "Always needing to be the adult in the room." I'm about to share something personal, but first, drop your city or country in the comments. Let's see how many hearts this story can touch. Heat rushed to my face, not from shame, but fury. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the stone floor. "Someone has to be," I snapped, barely holding back the tremble in my voice. "You're drunk, Gabriel. Again. And it's barely noon." His friends, Pete, Marco, and Tyler, chuckled from their end of the table, their faces flushed from too much wine and too little accountability. "Cut her some slack, man," Pete slurred with a smirk. "She just wants to keep you on that short leash." That broke something in me. I had flown across the ocean for this trip, biting my tongue through every crude joke and dismissive glance. I had played the smiling wife while they rehashed college memories, ignoring me as if I were a piece of expensive furniture Gabriel brought along to complete the picture. But this moment, right here, felt like a line I couldn't uncross. "I'm done," I whispered, more to myself than to them. I stood and turned away, not caring how it looked. The sun outside the restaurant seared my eyes, but it was the fire in my chest that made my vision blur. Behind me, I heard the scrape of Gabriel's chair as he followed. On the cobblestone street, he caught my arm. "Don't cause a scene," he growled, his breath warm with Chianti. "You're embarrassing yourself." I wrenched free. "No, Gabriel. You embarrassed me the moment you started drinking at breakfast and let your friends talk to me like I was a joke." His eyes narrowed, calculating. "You'll calm down," he said. "You always do." Not this time. I took a step back, the noise of the street swallowing my heartbeat. He opened his mouth to say something else, but then, like he was proving a point, he turned, walked back to his friends, and with a flick of his hand, said something that made them all laugh. Moments later, I watched the car door slam shut. The engine roared. The rental car pulled away, tires crunching over stone, their laughter trailing like smoke in the wind. They didn't look back. The car's engine faded into silence, leaving only the chirp of cicadas and the faint clatter of dishes from the cafe behind me. Dust still hung in the air where the rental had sped off, and for a full 10 seconds I stood motionless, the heat pressing against my skin like a punishment. I blinked once, twice. Surely they'd turn around. Surely this was some twisted joke. But the road remained empty. "Gabriel?" My voice cracked. I looked around like I might find a hidden camera crew emerging from behind a Vespa or a shouting waiter waving them back. Nothing. Just the curious glance of an old man nursing an espresso and a group of children chasing a stray dog down an alley. I ran after the disappearing shape of the car, gravel digging into my sandals. "Gabriel!" I shouted louder this time, chasing the echo of their laughter. But when I reached the end of the street, the bend swallowed everything. Gone. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I retraced my steps slowly, heart hammering against my ribs, trying to remember the last thing he'd said. Something about my purse having my passport. "You'll figure it out. You're so smart, right?" His words had slithered out between clenched teeth, soaked in wine and sarcasm. I turned in a slow circle, taking in the unfamiliar town. Terracotta rooftops, faded green shutters, flower boxes overflowing with color, beautiful and utterly foreign. My Italian extended only to grazie and vino rosso. I didn't even know the name of the town we'd stopped in for lunch. Locals at the cafe had returned to their meals, but their glances lingered on me like pity. My cheeks burned. I fumbled through my bag. Phone, 27% battery. Wallet, €80 and no cards. Gabriel had offered to carry them earlier, just in case. The air shifted, cooler now as clouds gathered over the sun. I sat on the edge of a planter, heart sinking with the realization he really wasn't coming back. He'd left me, not for an hour, not as a joke. He'd left me. The silence roared. I texted him, fingers shaking. "Where are you?" Message sent. Message delivered. No reply. I called, straight to voicemail. I called again. Pete, Marco, Tyler, voicemail. Blocked. A hollow throb settled in my chest, spreading through my limbs until I could barely sit upright. This was no longer about being stranded. This was about being discarded. I wasn't a person to them. I was an inconvenience. And I was alone. I paced the cracked stone sidewalk in front of the cafe, scanning every street like I could will the car back into existence. Any second now, I thought. They'd turn the corner laughing, Gabriel with that smug, crooked smile, pretending it was all a joke taken too far. I'd roll my eyes, maybe cry a little out of relief, and they'd pat my shoulder, call me a good sport. That's what this was. A joke. It had to be. A Vespa buzzed past, but it wasn't them. I checked my phone again. No new messages. I texted again. "This isn't funny. Come back." Delivered. Still no response. I sat down on the planter again, knees suddenly too weak to hold me. A couple strolled by, the woman's hand looped through the man's arm, both laughing gently in the late afternoon sun. My eyes followed them hungrily, as if proximity to their calm might make me whole again. "He's trying to teach me a lesson," I whispered, running a hand through my hair. "He just wants to scare me. That's all." I remembered the wine, the way his words had slurred, how Pete had egged him on. "You let her talk to you like that?" And then the laughter, sharp and mean, like they were 12 years old again, and I was the school teacher ruining their recess. Another check of my phone. Still nothing. I opened the map app, but with no internet, the screen just blinked uselessly at me. The knot in my stomach began to twist, a tightening, slow at first, then sharper with each second. I stood and walked to the edge of the street again, craning my neck. Empty. I laughed. Dry. Cracked. "This is insane," I muttered. He wouldn't just leave me. Not really. But then I remembered that look on his face, the tight jaw, the way he slammed the car door with finality, like he was closing a chapter. No. 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 I clutched my bag tighter, the panic crawling up my throat now. My breath caught. I tried calling again. Straight to voicemail. I redialed before the tone even stopped. Blocked. Blocked. I called Pete, Marco, Tyler, same, over and over again. Blocked. All of them. The cafe waiter approached me with hesitant concern, speaking in quick Italian. I blinked at him, the words meaningless noise. I shook my head. "I'm fine," I whispered, but the tears were already falling, hot and silent. He offered a small nod, retreating respectfully. I sank onto the curb, letting the disbelief drain from me inch by inch, replaced by something colder, heavier. This wasn't a prank. They weren't coming back. The streets emptied as the sun slipped behind the terracotta roofs, turning the sky a bruised lavender. Shopkeepers pulled down their metal shutters with the same finality I'd seen in Gabriel's eyes. I wandered through narrow alleys, no longer sure if I was walking in circles or slowly drifting farther from any place I recognized. My sandals scraped against uneven stones, and every window I passed reflected a woman I didn't recognize, wild-haired, glassy-eyed, trembling. My phone battery died sometime after my 15th desperate attempt to call someone, anyone. The last image before the screen went black was the mocking icon of a message left on read. I sat on a low stoop, hugged my knees, and forced myself to breathe. Think. 80 euros, no ID, no cards, just the clothes on my back and a small bag of half-melted lip balm and useless receipts. A dull hunger gnawed at my stomach, more from panic than emptiness. Across the narrow street, A light flickered on in a small bakery. Warm yellow spilled onto the pavement like a lifeline. I crossed before I let fear talk me out of it and pressed my hand to the door. Locked. I knocked, softly at first, then harder. A moment later, the door creaked open and a tiny woman in a flour-dusted apron appeared, eyes squinting at me behind thick glasses. She said something in rapid Italian. I shook my head, tears brimming. "I'm sorry, I don't speak. Do you have a room?" I pointed upward, miming sleep, hands together under my cheek. "Just for tonight." Her face softened. She looked up the stairs behind her, then back at me. With a sigh, she waved me in. The smell of rising dough and yeast filled the small shop, grounding me for one dizzy second. I followed her silently up a steep staircase, heart pounding. The room she led me to was tiny, barely big enough for the narrow iron bed shoved against the wall, a chipped sink in the corner, and a single window overlooking the quiet street. But it had a door. It had a lock. It had mercy. She handed me a clean towel and said something I didn't understand, then gave my arm a gentle pat before closing the door behind her. I sat on the bed and stared at my hands, still trembling. I didn't cry. Not then. I think my body had run out of salt. Instead, I lay down in my clothes, shoes and all, listening to the faint clatter of pans and the low hum of a radio from downstairs. The room smelled of sugar and flour and something warm I hadn't felt in hours. Safety. It wasn't home, but it wasn't the street, and for that night, it was enough. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and the kind of dry-eyed exhaustion that sleep doesn't cure. For one hazy moment, I forgot where I was, until the low hum of traffic and the scent of baked bread brought the truth crashing back. The tiny room, the borrowed towel, the memory of taillights fading into an Italian dusk. My phone lay on the nightstand, dark and lifeless. I dug through my bag for the charger, then stopped, breath catching. It wasn't there. Of course it wasn't. Gabriel had packed our day bag that morning. Efficient, thoughtful Gabriel, who always insisted on managing the important things. I swore under my breath and sat back on the bed, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. Maybe the woman downstairs had a charger. Maybe there was a cafe with Wi-Fi. Maybe this was still fixable. It took me an hour to find a shop that sold a charger compatible with my phone. 20 euros gone. I stood by the wall outlet like it was a hospital monitor, watching the screen flicker to life, praying the battery would charge fast enough to connect me to someone. Him. As soon as it turned on, I opened my messages. Nothing. I refreshed. Again. Nothing. I typed quickly. "Gabriel, please, just tell me what's going on." Delivered. I sent another. "I'm scared. Please come back." Delivered. No reply. I opened our call log and hit his name. Once, twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail. I called Pete. Voicemail. Marco. Blocked. Tyler. Ring. Voicemail. I tried Gabriel again. Nothing. A cold sweat broke across my back. Not even the decency of an answer. Not a word. Not a joke. Not a cruel, figure it out. Just silence. I stared down at my phone, heart pounding. I typed again. "Is this your idea of a joke? Is this payback? I don't understand. Just talk to me." All delivered. All unanswered. The truth started to take shape in the space where his voice should have been. It was quieter than I expected, more clinical. They had blocked me. All of them. Intentionally. Systematically. Like erasing a document. Like clearing a browser tab. I stared at the bakery window, the golden light inside too soft for how hard the world felt. Something inside me splintered, not with drama, but with quiet finality. They didn't forget me. They erased me. My phone buzzed, a low battery warning. I turned it off. Not to save power, but to stop watching it do nothing. The silence wasn't an accident. It was the answer. The pawn shop was tucked between a faded gelato stand and a shuttered tobacco store, its window smudged and cluttered with old watches, chipped porcelain, and the kind of forgotten heirlooms that hummed with stories no one wanted anymore. I stood outside for a full 5 minutes, my hand clenched around the tiny velvet box I hadn't opened in days. Inside, the air was stale, metal and dust and something faintly sour. A bell chimed as I stepped through the door. An old man looked up from behind the counter, peering at me over thick lenses. He said something in Italian. I didn't answer. I just opened the box and placed it on the glass. He lifted the ring gently with tweezers, turning it in the light. The diamond caught for a moment, a sharp gleam like a camera flash, then dulled again. He examined it silently, weighing more than carats. He was measuring desperation. I didn't cry. "200," he said finally. 200 euros. I stared at him. Gabriel had spent 10 times that on the upgrade for our 5th anniversary. He'd made a whole show of it in front of his parents. Because she deserves better than the starter ring I gave her when we were broke college kids. Now here I was, trading it for scraps. "Okay," I said. He counted the notes methodically. I stuffed them into my bag with shaking fingers, the weight of them too light for what I'd given up. Outside, the sky had turned a dull steel gray. I walked without knowing where I was going until I found myself at the bus station. A faded timetable flickered overhead. Rome, Naples, Venice. I scanned the names like someone reading a stranger's address book. My thumb hovered over my father's name in my contacts. One call and I'd be on the next plane home. One call and I'd explain, no, I'd listen. To my mother's voice tight with disappointment. To friends I hadn't seen in years ask me why I hadn't left Gabriel sooner. To 100 small ways I'd have to admit I'd been wrong. I lowered my hand. I didn't want to go back. Not to Boston, not to the house that smelled like Gabriel's cologne and 1,000 quiet resentments. Not to a life where I measured myself by how smoothly I kept the peace. My feet moved again, toward the ticket window this time. "Where to?" the woman behind the glass asked in clipped English. "Greece," I said, the word surprising even me. "As far as you can get me." She nodded once and started typing. Behind me, a family laughed as they gathered their bags. A child pressed her nose to the glass, watching buses come and go. I didn't look back. The bus pulled in with a sigh of brakes and a hiss of exhaustion, as though it, too, was tired of carrying people running from something. I stood on the cracked concrete platform with my paper ticket clenched in one hand and a crumpled bakery bag in the other, half a panini, gone stale, and a bottle of warm water that tasted like metal and desperation. The driver barely looked at me as he checked the ticket and waved me on. The inside smelled of old upholstery, sweat, and something vaguely lemon-scented trying, and failing, to cover it up. I found an empty seat halfway back, next to a window streaked with grime, and shoved my bag beneath my feet. As the engine growled back to life, I felt the first tremor of motion like a question. "Are you sure?" I didn't answer. I just stared out into the blackening sky, watching the edges of Italy slide past in smudges of light. There were only a few other passengers, a couple whispering in a language I didn't know, a man in a wrinkled suit reading a newspaper by the dim overhead light. No one made eye contact. No one asked where I was going. No one cared that I didn't know either. I leaned my head against the cold glass, the vibration of the road humming through my bones. Towns passed by like dreams, shuttered shops, lonely gas stations, silhouettes of churches and crumbling villas. I tried to sleep. I couldn't. My thoughts twisted around themselves, fraying at the edges like an old ribbon. What if he had come back and I'd already left? What if this was the mistake? What if I was becoming exactly what he always accused me of? Overdramatic, ungrateful, impossible to please. I opened my phone again. No signal. I didn't try to reconnect. Instead, I scrolled through old photos. There we were, Gabriel and I at a vineyard, at a charity gala. At our wedding, so polished, so full of promise, and yet I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed without flinching. I closed the gallery and turned off the screen. The bus stopped once in the night for fuel and stale coffee. I bought a small bag of almonds and watched the stars while I chewed, one by one, like they might anchor me to the moment. Then the ride resumed, long, silent, and strange. When the border came, a uniformed officer stepped on, barely glancing at my passport before waving me through. And just like that, I wasn't in Italy anymore. The sun was rising when the bus rolled into the coastal village. White buildings clung to the hills like secrets. The sea stretched wide and blue beyond them, indifferent and infinite. I had no idea where I was, and somehow, for the first time in days, that felt like hope. The sun was merciless, a white-hot weight pressing down from a sky so bright it hurt to look at. My sandals were coated in dust, the thin straps biting into swollen feet that had long stopped responding to pain. I'd walked for hours, away from the village, away from the bus station, away from the version of myself that still thought someone might come looking. The road had given way to a narrow dirt path lined with silver-leaved trees that shimmered in the heat like they were on fire. Olive trees, I realized dimly. I was in someone's grove, but I hadn't seen a soul since sunrise. My water bottle was empty, my legs trembled with each step, and a high ringing had begun in my ears like a warning bell I couldn't switch off. I stumbled once, caught myself, twice, and didn't. The third time, I went down hard, knees scraping against the packed earth, palms sliding through dry grass and loose stones. I tried to rise, but the sky tilted and rolled like the deck of a ship, and the trees blurred together in a soft silver haze. I let myself fall. The ground was hot beneath my cheek, and somewhere nearby a cicada screamed its endless song. My lips were cracked, my skin burned. I could feel the sun burrowing into me like it wanted to finish what everything else had started. And for a moment, just one terrible, beautiful moment, I didn't care. Maybe this was the ending Gabriel had written for me when he drove away. Maybe I was the joke after all. The woman who couldn't take a hint, who followed rules and begged for crumbs and still got left behind. My eyes fluttered shut. Somewhere in the silence, a voice called out. Sharp, female, foreign. I didn't understand the words, only the tone. Urgent, disbelieving. Then footsteps, fast and light, and hands, cool, weathered, real, on my arms, lifting, turning, cradling. Fosmo, Kira, she whispered, her voice breaking through the fog. A shadow fell over my face, and something cool pressed to my lips. Water. Real water. I drank greedily, choking once but not stopping, even as tears welled in my eyes from the shock of relief. I blinked up into the face of an older woman, skin like parchment, eyes like flint. She said something again, gentler now, and pointed to her chest. Elena, she said. I opened my mouth, tried to answer, failed. I lifted a hand and mimicked her motion. Alexis, I whispered. She smiled, nodded, and pulled me up slowly. Her body was small but solid. She bore my weight without question. She pointed uphill, toward a stone house nestled among the trees. And for the first time since Italy, I let someone guide me. The house was made of stone, weathered and low to the ground, like it had grown from the earth itself. Vines curled around the windows, and herbs hung in bundles beneath the clay-tiled awning. Elena led me through a creaking wooden door and into a kitchen that smelled like lemon, thyme, and wood smoke. I could barely stand on my own, legs buckling as she guided me to a chair. She moved with quiet purpose, filling a glass with water from a jug, then setting a steaming bowl of soup in front of me. The scent made my stomach clench with hunger and nausea all at once. My hands shook as I lifted the spoon, but I ate, slowly, gratefully. She said nothing as I drank and chewed, just watched with kind eyes, her fingers folded neatly in her lap. A man appeared in the doorway. Older, taller than Elena, with sun-darkened skin and a silver mustache. He wiped his hands on a cloth, eyes narrowing slightly when he saw me. Elena stood and said something to him in Greek, her tone clipped but gentle, explaining without apology. He stepped closer, his gaze sweeping over me with the caution of someone used to hardship and strangers. "Alexis," I said softly, pointing to my chest. He nodded once, then, after a beat, offered a hand. "Nikos," he said, voice low and graveled. I took it. His grip was firm. Not cold, not warm, just solid, real. They didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. They didn't look at me like I was broken. Elena offered me another spoonful. Nikos brought over a chair and sat, watching me eat like I was part of the room now, like I belonged. After I finished, Elena disappeared down a narrow hallway and returned with clean clothes, a cotton dress and a worn cardigan, and pointed to a small room off the kitchen. I followed her inside. The bed was narrow, the quilt handmade, the air cool with the scent of lavender tucked into the folds. A ceramic basin stood in the corner, next to a cracked mirror that showed me a stranger. Sunburned cheeks, blistered lips, hollow eyes. I washed my face and changed, the fabric soft against my raw skin. When I emerged, Elena smiled, small but proud, and nodded in approval. Nikos didn't say anything, just shifted slightly in his chair as if making room for me. That night, they showed me to the spare room upstairs. The mattress dipped in the middle, and the pillow smelled faintly of wood and soap. I lay there in the quiet, staring at the low ceiling beams, listening to their voices downstairs, calm, steady, unhurried. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. Safety. For the first time since that cafe in Italy, I closed my eyes and let myself sleep. The days unfolded like linen sheets left to dry in the wind, slow, clean, quietly purposeful. I woke each morning to the sound of roosters and the smell of bread rising downstairs. The window in my small upstairs room faced the grove, where early sunlight flickered through olive branches and cicadas hummed their ancient songs. It was nothing like Boston, nothing like the world I'd known, and maybe that's why I began to breathe again. Elena had no schedule, no list, no instructions, only gestures and soft encouragement. She showed me how to press herbs into jars, how to knead dough until it yielded without protest, how to hang laundry so the mountain wind didn't steal it away. Her hands were quick and graceful, her face lined with years of work and weather, her patience endless. Nikos, quieter, watched from a distance at first. He spent his mornings in the groves, inspecting trees with the reverence of a man tending a cathedral. I followed him once, unsure if I was welcome, but he simply handed me a pair of gloves and pointed to a bucket. We worked in silence, side by side, plucking fallen olives from the nets and sorting them by touch, not sight. I learned more from the rhythm of his movements than I ever could from words. My body ached in unfamiliar places, shoulders, back, hands, but it was the ache of use, of something earned. At night, I collapsed into bed with muscles sore and soul slightly less hollow. Elena insisted on feeding me constantly. When I tried to help clean, she waved me away. "Tomorrow," she said, her Greek soft but clear. "Today, you rest." We didn't speak much. My words were too foreign, and theirs too fast. But somehow it didn't matter. Communication came in other forms, handing me a slice of tomato sprinkled with salt and oil, tucking an extra blanket at the foot of the bed, leaving a lavender bundle on the pillow. One afternoon, while shelling peas on the back step, Elena handed me a wide-brimmed hat and placed it gently on my head. She grinned, satisfied, and said, "Greek now." I laughed, the sound surprising both of us. I started sleeping through the night, started eating without guilt, started smiling without flinching. The silence I once dreaded became a comfort. No phones, no mirrors, no performance. I still hadn't told them the truth about Gabriel, about the betrayal, but they never pressed. They treated me like someone who was healing, not someone who was broken. The farmhouse didn't feel like a place. It felt like a pause, a breath held between the person I had been and whoever I was slowly becoming. And though I didn't know how long I'd stay, I began to hope, for the first time, that I might not need to leave. ChatGPT Zai, I told myself I was only staying until I had a plan. A real one. Not just escaping Italy, but something concrete, returning to Boston, calling my father, applying for a new passport. I scribbled the words on a page torn from an old notebook Elena had left on the kitchen table. Call, consulate, find Wi-Fi, go home. I folded it and tucked it into my bag, where it stayed untouched. Days passed, then a week. The urgency faded, not all at once, but in soft, imperceptible pieces, like the sound of the sea on a still day, always there, but quieter than I expected. I meant to leave, but the idea of leaving became a thread I no longer pulled. It just hung there, something distant and theoretical. Every morning, Elena handed me a task. She never asked, just offered. A basket of eggs to collect, a row of beans to pick, bread to shape, jam to stir, windows to wash. There was always something to do, and always a chair waiting for me when I was done. At night, I would sit beside her on the porch, my feet bare, my hands sore. Nico smoked his pipe in silence, watching the sun bleed into the hills. We didn't speak much, but it never felt like emptiness. More like space. A kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. I started learning words. Thank you, water. Good. Elena clapped with delight when I pointed to the bread and said, "Sew me." She tapped her chest and said, "Philia," then tapped mine. Friends. I nodded, the lump in my throat catching me off guard. The scarf came next. She placed a pair of needles in my hands and showed me how to knit, her fingers deft and sure. I dropped stitches, tangled yarn, swore under my breath, but she only smiled and said, "Tomorrow better." And it was. The more I moved through their world, the more I stopped bracing for pain, for cruelty, for some unseen hand to yank me back to the sharp edges of what I'd known. I still jumped when the phone rang in the other room, but I no longer reached for it. There was no one left I wanted to hear from. One morning, I walked down to the grove alone. The sky was wide and quiet, the olives heavy on the branches. I stood in the middle of the trees, the sun warming the back of my neck, and felt the strangest thing. Steady. Not whole, not healed, but held. The note in my bag remained where I'd left it, its edges curling. I didn't throw it away, but I stopped needing to unfold it. The first time I put on the boots, they felt like a costume, heavy, stiff, too wide in the heel. Elena had placed them by the door with quiet purpose, alongside a pile of worn clothes folded with care. A cotton blouse, faded from the sun. Sturdy pants with a patch sewn near the knee. They smelled of soap and rosemary. They weren't mine, but I slipped them on anyway. At first, I moved like an imposter. I tugged at the pants. I flinched at the dirt under my fingernails. My skin stung from the sun, and sweat traced unfamiliar paths along my spine. I had spent years in curated comfort, dry-cleaned dresses, silk-lined heels, lip gloss in the exact right shade. I used to spend 20 minutes curling my hair just to pick out produce. Now it clung to my neck in a knot, held together with a piece of string. But something shifted the day I caught my reflection in the window above the sink. I stopped, looked, noticed. My face was still mine, but different. Tanned, raw. There were new lines around my mouth, but also something steadier in my eyes. I didn't look polished. I looked present. Gabriel would have hated it. He used to hand me blouses in department stores with tags I couldn't afford, whispering, "Try this. It says elegant but effortless." He called it love. I called it compromise. Somewhere along the way, my closet had become a museum of his preferences. I used to stand in front of the mirror and measure myself against the version of me that made him proud. That mirror was thousands of miles away now. And here, no one cared if my eyebrows were shaped or if my jeans were flattering. Elena cared if I drank enough water in the sun. Nikos cared if I remembered which olives to keep and which to toss. The rest didn't matter. I scrubbed the last flecks of old nail polish from my fingers and let my nails go blunt. I gave up on mascara, not out of defiance, but because it served no purpose. I stopped hiding the scar on my arm, the one from a fall on icy pavement years ago. I stopped hiding, period. The boots softened with time. The blouse lost its stiffness. The soil worked its way into every seam, and I stopped trying to scrub it out. My body grew stronger, my hands rougher. I wore the same clothes day after day, and not once did anyone suggest I was less because of it. Letting go didn't happen in a single moment. It was in the peeling paint of my old manicure, the way I tied my hair back without a mirror, the silence that filled the spaces where self-doubt used to live. And in that silence, something new began to grow. The first time I tried to carry a basket of olives, I nearly tipped it sideways, the fruit rolling across the dirt like marbles. Nikos just grunted, bent down without a word, and began scooping them up. I knelt beside him, mortified, expecting frustration. Instead, he handed me one of the bruised olives, pointed at the skin, and muttered, "Ohikali." Not good. We started again. Every day brought a new lesson. How to twist the branches gently, how to tell by touch if the fruit was ready, how to spread the net so nothing was lost. Nikos never coddled me, but he didn't dismiss me either. He showed me once, maybe twice, then he stepped back and let me fail. And fail I did, bent rakes, spilled baskets, confused weeds for herbs. But slowly, the failures became fewer. My hands toughened. My back stopped aching by noon. In the kitchen, Elena ruled with a wooden spoon and a smile that meant both approval and warning. I burned the first batch of bread, undercooked the next, and forgot salt in the third. "Again," she said each time, handing me flour like she was passing down a secret. She never wrote anything down. She cooked from memory, taste, instinct, and I followed her lead day after day, learning to trust my senses more than any recipe. By the third week, I could roll dolmodes without tearing the grape leaves and knew exactly how much lemon to squeeze over the grilled eggplant. Elena nodded with quiet pride, muttering, "Kali," when the flavors were right. Good. I clung to that word like praise from a mentor, repeating it silently as I stirred, as I chopped, as I learned. Language came slowly, pieced together from gestures, repetition, and trial. I scribbled words in a small notebook Elena gave me, sounding them out aloud while hanging laundry or sweeping the patio. Nero for water. Zestos for hot. Efkaristo for thank you, my most used phrase. The villagers began to notice. The old woman from the cheese stall started nodding when I passed. A boy on a bicycle shouted, "Calimera!" as he zoomed by. I was no longer invisible. Somewhere between burnt bread and bruised olives, something shifted. My arms grew stronger, sun-bronzed and no longer aching. My fingers, once manicured and delicate, bore cuts and calluses, each one a marker of work done by hand. I wasn't good at everything yet, but I was better than I'd been yesterday, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't performing for approval. I was learning for me. Not to be rescued, not to be admired, to belong. The sun had barely risen when we loaded the truck, the crates of olive oil clinking softly against each other in the bed. Nikos tied everything down with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I tried to mimic his knots with trembling fingers, earning a quick nod when I managed to get it right. Elena handed me a damp cloth and a stack of small brown cards, handwritten labels with looping Greek script and smudges of ink. At the market square, the morning air was thick with salt and the smell of ripe figs. Stalls bloomed like wildflowers, bright cloths draped over wooden tables, baskets brimming with lemons, cheeses wrapped in waxed paper, honey glistening in jars. The rhythm of voices, Greek, French, Italian, swirled around me like a melody I hadn't yet learned the words to. We found our usual spot beneath a faded striped canopy. Nikos arranged the oil bottles in neat rows, while Elena placed soaps and jars of preserved olives along the edge. Then they looked at me. Me. "Elena," I whispered, glancing at the crowd, at the unfamiliar faces. What if they ask?" She pressed a hand gently to my back and guided me forward. "Hamogela," she said with a wink. "Smile." I stood behind the table, nerves jangling, sweat prickling along my spine. The first customer, a woman in a wide sun hat, approached with a curious smile. She held up a bottle, turned it in her hands, and asked something in rapid Greek. I froze. But then, muscle memory kicked in. I repeated the lines Elena had drilled into me all week. "Polykaloladi, physiko, aptochoryo." Very good oil. Natural. From the village. The words felt clumsy on my tongue, but the woman smiled, nodded, and handed me a €5 note. I handed her a bottle with both hands, careful, reverent. My first sale. The morning blurred into movement. Questions I half understood, gestures I returned, coins exchanged, smiles offered. Elena floated nearby, correcting gently when needed, but mostly letting me try. By midday, I wasn't thinking about what to say anymore. I just said it. A young couple from Germany complimented my English, and I found myself laughing, telling them about the olives, about the soap, about how I'd come here by accident and stayed by choice. I caught Elena watching me, her eyes warm, her hands busy, but her mouth tilted into a proud smile. When the market began to wind down, Nikos handed me a small envelope, fingers smudged with olive oil. "Yasena," he said, "for you." Inside were a few folded bills. My share. My first honest wage in years. No expectations, no strings, just work. Fair and clean. I pressed the envelope to my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Not from fear, not from grief, but from something lighter. Pride. I didn't open the envelope right away. It sat in the pocket of my borrowed skirt, warm from my body, soft around the corners. As we bumped along the dirt road back to the farmhouse, I kept my hand pressed to it like a secret. Nikos drove in silence, the back of the truck lighter than it had been at dawn, crates emptied, bottles sold. Elena hummed under her breath beside me, tapping her fingers against her knee in time with a song only she could hear. Back at the house, she pulled down the laundry, and Nikos disappeared into the grove. I stood alone in the kitchen, dust motes dancing in the sunlight like flecks of gold. My legs ached, my feet throbbed, and a sunburn tightened across the back of my neck. But I didn't care. I sat at the table and unfolded the envelope. Inside were 5 bills, modest, wrinkled, clean. I stared at them, at the Greek numerals, at the faint scent of lavender clinging to the paper from Elena's hands. I traced the edges with my fingertip. It wasn't a fortune. Not even enough for one meal in the Boston restaurants Gabriel used to favor, where the wine list came on its own leather-bound tablet and the waiters addressed him by name. But it was mine. Money I had earned with calloused hands and sunburnt shoulders. No shared accounts, no passive-aggressive reminders about household budgets, no praise meted out like rewards for good behavior. Just work. Just worth. Tears pricked my eyes. I bit my lip and let them fall. Quiet and clean. I used to have my own bank card, my own job, my own clients. But somewhere in our carefully curated life, Gabriel had convinced me it was easier if he handled things. That paying bills and checking balances was stress I didn't need. That trusting him with everything was a sign of partnership, of love. It hadn't felt like giving up control. Not at first. It had felt like being taken care of, like luxury. Now I knew better. That night, I slipped the envelope under my pillow, like a child hiding treasure. I reached for it once, then again, fingers brushing against the soft paper just to be sure it was still there. I didn't tell Elena how much it meant. I didn't have the words in Greek for that kind of gratitude. Instead, in the morning, I rose early, tied my boots, and joined Nikos in the grove before the sun had even cleared the hills. There was work to do, and I had finally remembered how to stand on my own 2 feet. ChatGPT's eye, it started with a nod. Small, almost invisible. The baker's wife, standing outside her shop in the blue apron she wore every day, looked up from her broom and gave me a single, short nod as I passed. Not a smile, not a greeting, just acknowledgement. But it was something. A week earlier, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. Then came the tomatoes, a crate of them, ripened to a deep, blistering red, left on the farmhouse step with no note. Elena only smiled when I asked who they were from, slicing one open without a word and passing me a piece still warm from the sun. Later, I saw the boy from the produce stall wink at me when I handed him back his mother's woven basket. "Kalimera," he said brightly. "Good morning." His English was better than my Greek, but he didn't switch for my sake. He didn't need to. I understood him. The women at the market started calling me kopela, girl, in a way that felt less like dismissal and more like inclusion. Like they saw me. Not the stranger who couldn't pronounce street names or always asked for things twice, but the woman who stood behind the olive oil table, hands stained with soap and harvest, ready with exact change and a careful smile. At the taverna, Stavros no longer raised his brow when I walked in. He simply brought me a small glass of ouzo and said, "Ella katise," come, sit, as if I'd been doing it for years. Even Nikos, who rarely used more than 10 words a day with anyone, started giving me small, quiet praise. A nod at my pruning, a grunt of approval when I handled the press on my own. Once, after I properly stacked the oil jars in the cellar, he looked at me and said simply, "Kanis kaliduleia." You're doing good work. I carried that sentence with me for days. One afternoon, as I helped Elena hang laundry in the breeze, she pointed to the mountain and told me a long story in quick, musical Greek. I caught maybe 1 word in 10. Still, I listened. I nodded when she did. I laughed when she laughed. She reached over, took my face in her hands, and kissed my forehead like a blessing. "You listen with your heart," she said in halting English. That night, I walked through the village square alone, and no one stared. No one whispered. A little girl on a balcony above tossed a flower down toward me. I caught it. She giggled, and I realized I didn't feel like a guest anymore. I felt like someone with a place. Dinner was slow that night, stretched out by candlelight and the lazy hum of cicadas just beyond the open windows. Elena had made roast lamb, tender and soaked in lemon, and Nikos had opened a bottle of wine he usually reserved for holidays. I didn't ask why. I just poured carefully and tried not to drink too fast. The 3 of us ate quietly, the way we often did now. No need for words, just the comfort of clinking cutlery and shared silence. The kind that didn't require translation. After we cleared the dishes, Elena disappeared into the pantry. When she returned, she carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She placed it in front of me with surprising formality. I looked at it, then at her, but she only nodded once, eyes steady. Inside was a ledger, thick and fraying at the corners. Ink-stained pages filled with dates and notes, most of it in Greek. I recognized numbers, harvest yields, costs, suppliers, the business, their life's work, handwritten in looping script. Nikos cleared his throat, the way he always did when he wanted to say something important. "We old," he said. His English was rough, but his meaning was sharp. He gestured between the 2 of them. 68, 70. No children here. Only Sophia, Australia. I knew about Sophia, the daughter who had left, who sent gifts at Christmas but hadn't visited in years. I'd seen the sadness in Elena's eyes when her name was mentioned, the way she always said it softly, like afraid the wind might carry it too far. "You stay," Elena said gently. "You learn fast. Good hands, good heart. She reached over and touched my wrist. We teach you. You take. I blinked. Take? Nikos nodded, more firmly now. One day, your farm. The words knocked the breath out of me. I stared at the ledger, hands numb. A laugh escaped me, quick and disbelieving. Me? I'm not. This isn't. Elena held up a hand. Not now, not soon, but maybe, if you want. If I wanted. I looked at her, then at Nikos, then at the small kitchen where I'd spent so many evenings kneading bread and learning names for vegetables. I thought of the grove, of the soil under my nails, of the first euros I'd ever earned for myself, sitting folded beneath my pillow. No one had ever offered me something this real. Not Gabriel, with all his promises. Not even myself. My throat tightened. Why me? Elena shrugged. You hear. And somehow, that was enough. I closed the ledger carefully, hands shaking, and looked up at them through glassy eyes. Okay, I whispered. I'll stay. I'll learn. Their smiles broke slowly, like sunlight through leaves. And just like that, my future shifted, quietly, completely, into something I hadn't even dared to hope for. The phone had sat at the bottom of my bag for weeks, maybe longer, buried beneath receipts, balled-up tissues, and the soft cloth pouch where I now kept my euros. I told myself I didn't need it, that the world I'd come from had no place here among olive groves and warm bread and the quiet, steady rhythm of a life I could finally touch with both hands. But that night, after the offer, after the ledger, and the soft way Elena had said, if you want, something shifted. I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, my fingers twitching toward that weight at the bottom of the bag like a reflex. I reached for it before I could stop myself. The screen lit up. My old lock screen, a photo of the Boston skyline taken from our condo balcony, felt like a memory someone else had lived. The phone vibrated once, then again, as the Wi-Fi connected and a flood of notifications poured in. 317 emails, dozens of missed calls, voicemails, texts. I sat cross-legged on the bed, heart racing, thumb hovering over the first unread message. There were notes from friends I hadn't heard from in months. Some were polite. Hey, just checking in. How's Italy? Others more urgent. We're worried. Has anyone heard from her? A thread from my old design mentor caught my eye. Subject line, freelance opening, remote. You'd be perfect. I opened it. She'd recommended me for a sustainable design consultancy based in Copenhagen. Flexible hours, creative freedom. The final follow-up was dated just 2 weeks ago. I stared at the blinking cursor, throat dry. And then, Gabriel Davis. My stomach dropped. The subject line was simple. I know where you are. I opened it. Alexis, it read. It's taken months and a lot more money than I'd like to admit, but I've found you. Enough is enough. You've made your point. I'm flying to Athens. I'll be there Thursday. Be ready. There was no warmth, no apology, just expectation. The assumption that I would wait, that I would come. He still thought this was a tantrum. I stared at the message for a long time. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from clarity. Gabriel still believed I was the same woman he'd left standing on a street in Italy, but she was gone. I powered off the phone and set it gently on the nightstand. The house was quiet. The breeze carried the scent of rosemary through the open window. I could hear Elena's faint snore through the thin wall. Gabriel was coming. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being found. I was ready to be seen. ChatGPT's eye, the words on the screen didn't move, but they vibrated inside me like something alive. I'm flying to Athens. I'll be there Thursday. Be ready. No greeting, no question, just a command. I read the email again, slower this time, as if the second pass might soften it. But it didn't. Gabriel's tone hadn't changed. It was the same voice he used when telling waiters to send a bottle back or reminding me that I was overreacting in front of his colleagues. Flat, firm, final. He wrote like I was an object misplaced, not a person with choices. I stared at the closing line. "I'm coming to bring you home." Home. The word snagged in my throat. Did he mean our apartment in Boston, with its cold marble countertops and curated throw pillows? The one where I'd learned to laugh on cue and apologize first? Or did he mean his home, the one where I'd become a shadow stitched into the edges of his life? I stood up too fast, the chair scraping against the tile. My heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted out. I paced the room in tight, nervous circles, one hand in my hair, the other clutching the phone like it might bite me. There was no apology in his message, no remorse, not even a question about whether I was okay. Just the assumption that I would fall back in line, that the woman he'd abandoned in a foreign country was still frozen at that cafe, too stunned to move. But she wasn't. She'd sold her wedding ring, slept in a stranger's attic, picked olives with blistered hands and baked bread without measuring cups. She had a place now, a purpose, a voice. I opened the wardrobe and stared at my clothes. Linen, cotton, worn soft by work and weather. Nothing elegant, nothing polished. I'd long since stopped checking for wrinkles, stopped caring if I looked like the kind of woman Gabriel could present at a boardroom dinner. He would hate this version of me. And maybe that was the point. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass, watching the olive trees sway in the darkness, strong and stubborn and rooted. Gabriel was coming, but he wouldn't find the woman he left behind. He'd find someone who had learned how to stand still without shattering, someone who had finally remembered how to say no. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed listening to the creaks of the old farmhouse, the soft breath of wind through the shutters, the distant rustle of olive trees. My eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, wide open, waiting for something that no longer felt like fear, but wasn't yet peace. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I found Elena at the kitchen table, rolling grape leaves with the same calm she applied to everything. She looked up, eyes sharp, and before I could even speak, she said, "Coffee first." We sat in silence as the kettle boiled. Then I said his name, quietly, like it might still have power. "Gabriel, he's coming." She didn't flinch, just reached across the table and took my hand, her palm warm and steady over mine. "What you need?" she asked. "A lawyer," I told her. "A printer. Time." By mid-morning, I was sitting in the back room of a narrow building above the pharmacy with Katerina, the village's only lawyer. Her English was slow but certain, the kind that came from letters, not movies. She didn't ask why I wanted to file. She just nodded when I said divorce, slid a form toward me, and pulled out a fountain pen. Together, we drafted the paperwork, both in Greek and English. She explained what I was entitled to. I listened, but only half. I didn't want anything but distance, a clean cut, my freedom. That afternoon, I finally answered the emails from my former mentor. "Yes," I wrote, "I'm interested." We arranged a call. She didn't ask where I'd been, just told me the position was still mine if I wanted it. Remote, flexible, a project focused on sustainable building materials for refugee housing in the Aegean. The irony wasn't lost on me. "You've changed," she said, not unkindly, after I spoke for the first time in months. "I had to," I replied. I spent the rest of the evening typing in the quiet office Nikos had set up long ago, but rarely used. The printer wheezed as it came back to life, spitting out the divorce papers with slow, mechanical groans. I watched the pages stack one by one, each sheet a step away from the version of me that used to measure happiness by how well I played wife. When I returned to the farmhouse, Elena was waiting with a stack of folded clothes and a plate of warm bread. She didn't speak. She just placed a hand on my shoulder and left the room. I sat alone and signed the papers. My name, steady. His name, fading. Thursday was coming. So was he. But I wouldn't run. This time, I'd be ready to open the door and close it behind him. The sound of the car was foreign here, too smooth, too polished. It broke the stillness like glass shattering on stone. I stood in the press room, my hands still slick with oil, heart thrumming with quiet, electric calm. I wiped them slowly on a towel and walked outside. The silver sedan didn't belong. Its lines were too sharp, its presence too loud against the muted palette of the grove. Gabriel stepped out wearing tailored chinos and a crisp white shirt, sunglasses perched in his hair like a crown. He squinted at the farmhouse, nose wrinkling at the dust on the shutters, the chickens scratching in the dirt. Then he saw me. He hesitated. Just for a second. I saw it. I didn't move. His eyes traveled over me. Work boots, oil-streaked apron, arms sun-browned and strong. My hair was pulled back in a tie, wisps sticking to my temple. I wore no makeup, no jewelry, not even the faintest trace of who I used to be. "Alexis," he said finally, stepping forward with that familiar smile, too bright to be sincere. "You look different." "I am." He stopped a few paces away, looked around. "This is where you've been?" His voice tightened, like the place personally offended him. "Jesus, Alexis, you vanished. You didn't answer anything. Do you have any idea what that looked like?" I crossed my arms, feeling the weight of the divorce papers in the folder tucked behind the doorframe. "It looked like what it was. You left me. I left you back." "It was a mistake," he said quickly. "A joke gone too far. I was drunk. We were fighting. You know how we are, always pushing each other's buttons. I came back. You weren't there." "You blocked my number," I said calmly. "All of you did." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "I didn't think—" "No," I cut in. "You didn't, and that's the problem." He glanced at the house, at the grove behind me. "What is this? Some kind of punishment? Some off-grid therapy fantasy? Alexis, come on. This isn't you." "You're right," I said. "This isn't the woman who begged you to listen, who shrank herself to keep your peace, who smiled through dinner parties where no one remembered her name. That version of me is gone." He laughed, sharp and condescending. "So what, you're a farmer now?" "I'm a partner," I said, voice steady. "In a business, in a life. One that doesn't ask me to disappear." The wind stirred the trees behind me. Elena stepped out quietly onto the porch, her eyes on me, saying nothing. Gabriel looked at her, then back at me. "You're not serious." "I'm done being something to manage," I said, holding his gaze. "I don't need rescuing. I never did." He stared at me, jaw tight, waiting for something to break. But nothing did, especially not me. Gabriel was still standing in the courtyard like he couldn't quite believe I hadn't rushed into his arms. Like this was a movie, and we were in the scene where the stubborn wife finally caves, forgives, forgets. I watched his fingers flex at his sides, the muscles in his jaw twitching beneath his perfectly shaven skin. I used to know exactly what he was thinking. Now, I didn't care. I stepped back inside the farmhouse and returned a moment later with the folder. Thin, precise, final. I held it out to him. He didn't take it right away. He looked at it like it might burn him. "What's this?" he asked, but his voice had gone quiet now. "Divorce papers," I said. "Filed here and in the U.S. The Greek version is for your signature. The English one is just a formality." He blinked, laughing under his breath. "You're serious?" "As serious as you were when you left me in another country without money or a way to get home." He ran a hand through his hair. "Alexis, come on. You're not thinking straight. You're tired, emotional. I know you. You're not impulsive. You don't throw away a decade because of one mistake." I didn't flinch. "It wasn't one mistake. It was years of erasing me in small, quiet ways. You just finally did it out loud." "This place," he snapped, gesturing around him, "has gotten into your head. You're not this woman." "No," I agreed. "I wasn't. But I am now." I took a slow step forward and placed the folder in his hands. He looked down at it, stunned, like it had appeared from smoke. "You made your choice the day you drove away," I said. "This is mine." He shook his head, face hardening. "You'll regret this. You're giving up everything we built." "I'm building something else." The silence stretched. The breeze shifted, bringing with it the faint smell of crushed olives and soil and something warm baking inside. Behind me, the old farmhouse stood like it always did. Quiet, solid, real. Gabriel looked smaller than I remembered. His clothes too clean, his face too smooth, like he hadn't aged a day since I'd last seen him. But I had. He finally took a step back, the papers limp in his hands. "Good luck, Alexis," he muttered. "You'll need it." "No," I said gently. "I really won't." He turned without another word, climbed into his car and drove away. No laughter this time, no cruel parting shot, just the fading sound of tires on gravel and a puff of dust dissolving behind him. When it cleared, I was still standing. Still here, and for the first time I wasn't looking for a way out. I was home. The silence after Gabriel left was the loudest thing I'd ever heard, not the kind that echoed, the kind that settled, deep and still, like water after a storm. I stood there for a long time, not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I finally had the space to feel what I wanted. No panic, no guilt, just breath. Inside, Elena was folding linens at the kitchen table. She looked up when I entered, searching my face, and when I gave her the faintest nod, she returned it without a word. She didn't ask what he'd said. She didn't need to. She'd known long before I had that I wouldn't leave with him. I poured myself a glass of water, hands steady, and sat down across from her. We worked side by side in silence, the kind that comes not from absence but understanding. After a while, she slid a clean cloth my way and handed me another sheet. Choosing him had always been the default, not because I was weak, but because it was familiar, comfortable, predictable in its unhappiness. I'd told myself for years that it was easier to stay, that it was love, that someday he'd remember who I used to be, who we used to be. But love doesn't require you to disappear to make space for someone else. This table, these linens, this quiet house smelling of thyme and baking bread wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't prove anything. But it made room for me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to ask permission to exist. Later, I walked through the grove alone. The trees swayed gently in the afternoon wind, their branches whispering things I couldn't translate but understood anyway. I ran my fingers along the rough bark, the soil soft beneath my feet. These trees had stood through storms, through fire, through decades of pruning and regrowth. They knew something about starting over. I paused beneath one that leaned just slightly, like it had bent to listen. I closed my eyes and let the wind tangle my hair. I didn't want my old life back. I didn't want the marble countertops or the designer dinner parties. I didn't want the version of myself who had spent years perfecting the art of silence. I wanted this. Work that made my hands ache. People who looked me in the eye. A life I had to choose every day, not because it was easy, but because it was mine. I turned back toward the farmhouse, the light golden now, casting long shadows across the path. For the first time, I wasn't choosing survival. I was choosing myself. What would you have done in my place? Stayed and grown, or gone back to what was once familiar? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below.